6. Our own son shoved us off the cliff to silence us. My husband hissed, "Play dead!" My name is Hilda. I'm 60 years old, and what I'm about to tell you will forever change the way you see your own family. Just 3 days ago, my own son, Damien, and my daughter-in-law, Melissa, pushed my husband, Henry, and me off a 90-foot cliff. As I lay there broken and bleeding, I heard my husband whisper desperately, "Hilda, don't move. Play dead." But that wasn't even the worst part. The real horror came when Henry revealed a truth that shattered my heart, a secret our children had kept from us for 25 years. For 4 decades, Henry and I built what we thought was the perfect family. Every morning, we'd wake up in our little suburban home to the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of birds outside. I worked as a teacher at the local elementary school, and each afternoon I'd come home with stories about my students. Henry owned a small carpentry shop where his rough but skilled hands turned simple wood into beautiful furniture. We had 2 sons, Richard, our firstborn, and Damien, who was 5 years younger. Richard was the soul of the house, always laughing, always helping his father, always shielding me from worry. Damien was quieter, more reserved, but I loved him just as fiercely. As a mother, you tell yourself you never play favorites. Or at least, that's what you want to believe. Every Sunday after church, our family gathered around the oak table Henry had carved with his own hands. Richard would tell us about his dream of studying engineering, while Damien mostly stayed quiet, picking at his food. Life was simple and beautiful. In the evenings, Henry and I took long walks along the trails near town, talking about our dreams, how we'd watch our grandchildren grow, and how we'd grow old together in that very same house. I never realized those peaceful walks were training for the one that almost killed me. On weekends, our home was full of life. My sisters, Harriet and Irene, came with their families, and the house filled with laughter and the smell of food. The kids ran around while the women shared recipes in the kitchen, and the men worked on something out in the yard. Henry was my perfect partner. Even after 40 years of marriage, he still brought me wildflowers he'd pick on his way to work. He helped me grade my students' papers, and I held pieces of wood steady for him in his workshop. We were a team, unbreakable, or so I believed. At night, we'd sit together on the porch, watching the stars and talking about our future. We dreamed about traveling once we retired, seeing the ocean for the first time, building a smaller home when our children had families of their own. I thought we had the perfect happiness. But as I would learn years later, perfect happiness often hides the deepest tragedies. When Richard turned 20, something changed. He and Damien began to argue about things I didn't understand. I'd hear them whispering in the hallway, only for them to stop as soon as I appeared. Henry told me it was just brotherly stuff and not to worry. I believed him, because I needed to believe my family was still perfect. Then one night, exactly 25 years ago, Richard didn't come home for dinner. We waited until 11, then midnight, then 1 in the morning. Damien said he was studying in his room, but when I asked about his brother, there was something strange in his eyes. Henry went out searching with the neighbors. They looked everywhere, every trail, every place Richard loved. At dawn, they found his body at the bottom of the river gorge. The police said it was an accident, that he must have slipped in the dark. I never questioned it because I couldn't bear to imagine the alternative. Richard's funeral was the darkest day of my life. I wore the same black dress I'd worn at my mother's funeral. Damien was strangely calm, too calm for someone who'd just lost his brother. While I cried until there were no tears left, he sat silent, his expression cold. When I think of that face now, it chills me. Henry stayed by my side, holding me up when my legs gave out, whispering words of comfort that I now realize must have tasted bitter in his mouth. After Richard's death, Damien changed completely. He became more attentive, more affectionate, like he was trying to make up for something. He helped me around the house, spent time with his father, brought me small gifts when I looked sad. I thought it was his way of grieving, of healing. But now I know it was something else entirely. He was building a mask, a perfect disguise to hide the monster underneath. The years passed, and although the pain never left, we learned to live with it. Damien married Melissa, a sweet girl from the next town. They seemed happy. They had 2 beautiful children, and for a while I thought life had finally given us a second chance. Melissa called me Mom and helped around the house. Damien had inherited Henry's gift for carpentry and opened his own shop. Everything seemed perfect again. But now, lying broken at the bottom of this gorge, with the taste of blood in my mouth, I finally understand. That happiness was all a lie, a carefully constructed illusion. The first signs that something was wrong appeared 6 months ago when Henry and I decided to update our will. We had worked hard all our lives, and between our house, the land I inherited from my parents, and our savings, we had about $200,000 to leave to our children and grandchildren. It was Damien who suggested we see a lawyer. "Mom, Dad, you're both 60 now. It's time to get things in order," he said with that smile I now know was fake. Melissa nodded beside him, stroking my hand gently with the same fingers that would later push me toward my death. "We love you so much," she said sweetly. "We just want to make sure you're protected." I took her words as love. How foolish I was. The lawyer, Albert, was an old friend. He explained our options: a trust, dividing the inheritance among the grandkids, or a traditional will. Damien insisted we name him and Melissa as our sole heirs, saying they'd handle the fair distribution later. "You'll need us when you're older," he said. "It's just easier if we can manage things for you." Something about his tone bothered me, but Henry didn't seem concerned. My husband had always been trusting. He thought it made sense. I wanted to believe him. After all, Richard, my firstborn, had always planned to take care of us when we got older. But Richard was gone, and Damien was all we had left. We signed the papers that Tuesday afternoon. Melissa wore a pretty green dress and hugged me tightly afterward. "Now we're officially a united family forever," she whispered in my ear. Her words sent a chill down my spine, though I didn't yet know why. That night, while cooking dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake. Over the next few weeks, Damien and Melissa started visiting us more often, but their visits felt different. They weren't just coming to spend time with us anymore. They came with suggestions: how we should improve the house, what investments to make, what life insurance policies to buy. "Mom, you should think about selling this big house and moving somewhere smaller," Melissa said one day, running her hand along our furniture with a calculating look. "We could help you find a nice apartment in town." But I loved our home. Every corner held a memory. Every room told the story of our 40 years together. The kitchen where I cooked countless meals, the workshop where Henry crafted his masterpieces, the yard where our children and grandchildren played. I couldn't imagine leaving. When I told them that, I saw irritation flash in Damien's eyes. "Mom, you're being irrational," he said sharply, a tone I'd never heard from him before. "This house is too big for people your age. If you fall down the stairs or something happens, we won't be able to help you." Melissa nodded quickly. "And the upkeep must be expensive," she added. "It would be smarter to sell while the market's high." Henry started to see their point. Always the practical one. He said their arguments made sense. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something darker behind all this pressure. One night, after another tense conversation, I asked Henry if he thought it was strange how suddenly Damien cared about our finances. "Hilda, he just wants to help," Henry said while brushing his teeth. "Maybe we should consider his suggestions. We're not as young as we used to be." But I saw doubt in his eyes, just a flicker, but it was there. I think he had already started to suspect something, even if he didn't want to admit it. Things escalated when Damien suggested we give him power of attorney over our finances. "It's just for precaution," he said casually, while Melissa made tea in our kitchen as if she owned the place. "If one of you gets sick, we can handle things without legal trouble." It sounded so logical, almost convincing, but something about his insistence made me uneasy. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to Henry breathe, trying to understand why I felt so afraid. The next day, I called my sister Harriet for advice. She's always been sharper than me, more skeptical. When I told her about Damien's pressure, she went quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Hilda, doesn't it seem odd that Damien's so eager to control your money? He has his own business. Why would he need access to your finances?" Her words hit me like a slap. She was right. Damien had never seemed to need money. He'd never borrowed from us, never hinted at any financial trouble. That afternoon, when Damien came by for another talk about our future, I decided to confront him. "Son," I said, sitting in the living room, "why is it so important for you to control our finances? Your father and I are still in our right minds." His reaction was immediate and terrifying. His face hardened, his eyes turned cold and calculating. "Mom, it's not about control," he said tightly. "It's about love, care, and family responsibility." But the way he said family responsibility sounded more like a threat than love. Melissa jumped in then, her voice soft but firm. "Hilda, we just want what's best for you. It hurts to see you worry about things we could easily handle." That night, after they left, Henry and I had our first serious argument in years. He thought I was being paranoid. I thought he was being naive. "Henry," I said as we washed the dishes, "do you remember what Damien was like before Richard died? He was different, distant. There was something about him that scared me." Henry stopped washing the plate in his hands and looked at me intently. In his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before, recognition. "Hilda," he said quietly, "there are things about Richard's death that I never told you." My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. His words hit me like a lightning strike. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. Henry sank heavily into one of the kitchen chairs, the same table where we'd shared thousands of family meals, where Richard used to do his homework, and where Damien had always sat silently. He ran his hands over his face, as if he could wipe away 25 years of tormenting memories. "The night Richard died," he began, his voice breaking. "Damien wasn't in his room studying like he told us. I saw him leave the house around 8. I followed him because something in his attitude had been worrying me. He'd been strange lately, angry, resentful." Henry paused, staring at his hands as if the awful truth were carved into them. "I saw them, Hilda," he whispered. "By the gorge. They were arguing, screaming horrible things at each other." My world started spinning. "What were they arguing about?" I asked, even though a part of me didn't want to know. Henry looked up, and I saw tears glistening in his eyes, tears he hadn't even shed at our eldest son's funeral. "It was about the inheritance," he said finally. "Damien was furious because Richard was the oldest. According to family tradition, most of what we owned would go to him, but there was more. Something about money Richard had found." My stomach dropped. "What money?" I whispered. Henry took a deep, shaking breath. 3 days before Richard died, he came to see me in the workshop. He'd discovered that Damien had been stealing money from our family savings account. Small amounts at first, but then larger ones. Richard had proof. He'd been investigating for months. I felt sick. My youngest son, the one who had comforted me after Richard's death, who had helped me, cared for me, had been stealing from us long before that night. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I demanded, my voice breaking. Henry's eyes filled with guilt. "Because when I got to the gorge that night, it was already too late," he said hoarsely. "I saw Damien standing next to Richard's body. Our son was trembling, crying, repeating, 'It was an accident! It was an accident!' He looked at me with those desperate eyes and begged for my help. 'Dad,' he said, 'Richard tried to hit me. I just defended myself. He slipped.'" Tears streamed down my face. "But you believed him," I said softly, already knowing the answer. Henry nodded slowly, the guilt etched deep into his expression. He was my son, Hilda, my youngest. Richard was already gone. I couldn't bring him back by destroying the other. I convinced myself it was an accident, that Damien had learned his lesson, that he'd become a better man because of it. And the stolen money? I pressed. What happened with that? Henry sighed deeply. Damien promised he'd pay it back little by little. He said he'd taken it to invest in a business that went wrong. He swore he'd never do anything like that again. And I believed him, Hilda. God forgive me, I believed him, because I needed to believe my son wasn't a killer. I stood up, dizzy, gripping the wall for balance. Everything I'd believed about my family, about my surviving son, about the last 25 years, it was all a lie. Did he ever pay it back? I asked, though I already knew from the look in Henry's eyes. Never, he said quietly. In fact, he kept taking small amounts. I pretended not to notice, because admitting it meant admitting I'd covered up a murder. I became his accomplice, Hilda. Every time I stayed silent, every time I ignored the missing money, I became more complicit. The truth hit me like a blow. That's why he wants control of our finances, I whispered. It's not out of love, it's because he wants to finish what he started 25 years ago. Henry nodded gravely. And there's more, Hilda. Something I found out just a few weeks ago. My heart clenched. What else could there possibly be? Henry went to his desk and pulled out a stack of papers he'd hidden beneath others. I've been quietly looking into Damien's finances, he said. His carpentry business isn't doing nearly as well as he claims. He's on the verge of bankruptcy. He owes over $100,000 to banks and suppliers. The papers shook in my hands as I read them. Damien wasn't a successful craftsman. He was a desperate man living off lies and stolen money. Does Melissa know? I asked, remembering her soft voice and loving hugs. I'm sure she does, Henry replied bitterly. I've seen how she guides their conversations, how she asks specific questions about our savings, our house, our life insurance. Those aren't innocent questions, Hilda. Those are the questions of someone calculating how much our deaths are worth. A chill ran down my spine. Our deaths, I whispered. Saying it aloud made it real. Until that moment, I'd believed Damien just wanted to take advantage of us financially. But if he'd killed his own brother over money, what would stop him from killing his parents? Henry, I said, grabbing his hands, we have to go to the police. We have to tell them everything about Richard, about what's happening now. But Henry shook his head, his face heavy with hopelessness. With what proof, Hilda? I covered up a murder. If I talk now, I'll go to prison. And who's going to believe a 65-year-old man who's been silent for 25 years? He was right. So what do we do? I asked, my voice breaking. Wait for him to kill us like he killed Richard? We'll be careful, Henry said, trying to sound braver than he felt. We'll find a way to protect ourselves, gather proof. But his words were cut short by the ringing of the phone. It was Damien. Hi, Mom, he said in that sweet, polished voice that now made my blood run cold. Melissa and I were talking, and we thought it'd be lovely to celebrate your 40th anniversary with something special. How about we take you to those mountains you've always wanted to visit next weekend? We could go hiking, take pictures, make it a perfect family day. My blood froze. I looked at Henry, who had heard every word. The terror in his eyes mirrored mine. That's a very sweet idea, son, I managed to stammer. Let us think about it and call you tomorrow. When I hung up, Henry and I just stared at each other in silence, both realizing what that invitation really was, an invitation to our own execution. The mountains, I whispered. He's going to take us to the mountains, kill us, and make it look like an accident. Henry nodded grimly, the same way he must have the night he saw Richard at the gorge. That night, we didn't sleep at all. We lay in bed, holding each other, planning how to survive our own son. The following days were pure torment. Henry and I had to act normal, pretending nothing was wrong when Damien and Melissa came over. We smiled when they mentioned the trip, nodded along as they spoke with excitement about family time. Inside, every nerve in my body screamed in fear. I was looking into the eyes of my oldest son's murderers, and I knew they were planning to do the same to us. Melissa came over Wednesday afternoon with a shopping bag and that radiant smile that now looked demonic. "Hilda, dear," she said, hugging me tightly with the same arms that would soon shove me toward death. "I bought some things for our mountain adventure: cookies, water, fruit, everything for the picnic." She unpacked the bag like an excited child, but all I could think about was how each of those items could help them cover up our murders. "I also got a new camera," she added, proudly holding up an expensive digital one. "I want to capture every moment of this special day. These will be photos we'll treasure forever." Her words made my stomach turn. The only photo she'd take would be of our broken bodies at the bottom of a cliff, if anyone ever found us. Then Damien walked in, carrying a new hiking backpack. "Dad," he said cheerfully, "I bought all the safety gear: ropes, harnesses, lanterns, a first aid kit." Every word sounded like mockery. Safety equipment for our planned murders. "Isn't that a bit dangerous for people our age?" I asked, trying to sound casual, searching for any excuse to cancel the trip. Melissa touched my cheek with that false tenderness that made my skin crawl. "That's why we picked a really easy trail," she said sweetly. "Even kids could do it. And don't worry, we'll be with you the whole time." Yes, they'd be there to take care of us, right up until they pushed us off the edge. That night, after they left, Henry and I sat in the living room, shaking. Not from the cold, but from the terror we'd been suppressing. "We can't go," I whispered. "We'll make up some excuse." "If we don't go," Henry said gravely, "they'll find another way. Maybe something that looks even more accidental. A fire, a robbery gone wrong. At least in the mountains. We'll know what they're planning." His logic was terrifying, but it made sense. "So what do we do?" I asked desperately. "We'll go," he said after a long pause, "but we'll be ready. I'll hide my phone and set it to record everything. If we survive, we'll have proof, and if we don't—" His voice broke. "At least someone will know the truth." That Friday night, we barely touched our dinner. We knew it might be our last meal in that kitchen, the same one where we'd once laughed and dreamed as a real family. Henry went over the will one last time, making sure Damien couldn't take everything without raising questions. "I wrote a letter," he said, pulling a sealed envelope from his desk. "It's for your sister, Harriet. I explained everything about Richard, about what Damien's planning. I hid it with our important documents. If we don't come back, she'll know where to find it." That night, we went to bed holding each other, whispering what might be our final words. "If something happens to me," Henry said softly, "I want you to know these 40 years with you have been the best of my life. Despite everything, despite the mistakes, I love you more than my own life." I cried silently, memorizing his warmth, his breathing, the smell of his skin. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, the sky cruelly beautiful. Damien arrived early, whistling a cheerful tune that froze my blood. "Morning, lovebirds," he called. "Ready for your big adventure?" Melissa appeared behind him, radiant as a bride on her wedding day. Except this was a wedding with death. During breakfast, which we could barely touch, Damien spread a map across the table. "It's a beautiful trail," he said eagerly. "It leads to a lookout where you can see the entire valley. The view's incredible." His eyes gleamed with excitement, demonic excitement. Of course, the view would be incredible. It would be the last thing we'd ever see. "The trail had some steep parts," Melissa said casually, as if she were giving us friendly tourist advice. "But nothing you experienced hikers can't handle." Her comment about us being experienced hikers felt like a cruel joke. Henry and I were in our 60s. We could barely manage a walk through the park. As we loaded the car, I watched Damien carefully checking his backpack. Every movement was deliberate, controlled. Inside, I caught sight of ropes, a small shovel, and something that looked like a flare gun. "What's that for?" I asked, pointing at it. "For safety," he replied without hesitation. "If we get lost or something goes wrong, we can send a distress signal." Of course, I knew what that really meant. The distress signal would come after they pushed us off a cliff, so our bodies could be found and our deaths written off as a tragic accident. Every little detail had been planned to perfection. The 2-hour drive to the mountains felt endless. Melissa put on cheerful music, singing along as if this really were a happy family trip. Damien drove carefully, following every traffic rule to the letter. He didn't want to risk a real accident, not before his perfect plan could unfold. During the ride, Henry reached over, squeezed my hand, and quietly started the recording on his phone. Everything from this point on would be captured. If we survived, we'd have proof. If we didn't, at least the truth wouldn't die with us. When we finally arrived at the trailhead, my heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd faint. The place was breathtaking. Tall trees, the soft murmur of a nearby river, but to me it looked like the stage for our own execution. Damien and Melissa took their backpacks out of the car, smiling and joking like a couple on vacation. "Ready for the adventure?" Damien asked, and in that moment I saw it. The same cold glint in his eyes that I'd seen 25 years ago, the night Richard died. The trail started off easy, winding between moss-covered rocks and tall green trees. Melissa walked ahead, snapping photos and commenting on everything she saw. "Look at those wildflowers," she said, pointing, "and that beautiful bird. Oh, it's perfect." Her act was flawless. The sweet, loving daughter-in-law having a wonderful day with her in-laws. Damien stayed behind us, supposedly to make sure we didn't fall behind, but I could feel his eyes on our backs like knives. Every time I turned, he smiled that same smile he'd been wearing for years, the one that used to seem kind but now looked like a mask. "How are you doing back there, Mom?" "Dad?" he'd ask with false concern. "Need a break?" After an hour, the trail grew steeper. My legs burned and Henry was struggling to catch his breath. We weren't built for this. Damien and Melissa knew it. They'd chosen this route to exhaust us, to make us easy targets when the time came. "We're almost at the lookout," Melissa called out. But I'd studied the map before leaving home, and I knew she was lying. We still had at least another hour to go. That meant the lookout she was talking about wasn't the real one. It was the place they'd chosen to kill us. As we climbed, I tried to memorize everything. The trees, the rocks, any landmarks that might help me if I somehow survived and had to tell the police where it all happened. Henry was doing the same. Every so often, our eyes met, filled with shared terror and grim determination. Then Melissa stopped suddenly. "Oh, look at that!" she exclaimed, pointing to a rocky outcrop to the right. "That cliff has an amazing view. Let's go up there for some special photos." My stomach dropped. There it was. The spot. The cliff rose about 90 feet above the main trail, reachable by a narrow, dangerous path. The rocks looked loose, and there were barely any trees to grab if someone slipped. Below lay a deep gorge lined with jagged stones. "I don't know if that's a good idea," I said, forcing a casual tone. "That path looks a bit dangerous for people our age." But Damien was already walking toward it, his backpack of safety gear swinging at his side. "Come on, Mom," he said in that persuasive tone he used to use as a boy. "It'll only take a few minutes. Melissa's right. The photos from up there will be spectacular." The way he said spectacular made me shiver. They'd be spectacular, all right. Photos of our deaths. Henry squeezed my hand, reminding me that his phone was still recording. We had to go along. If we refused, they'd find another place, another excuse. The climb to the cliff was brutal. Loose rocks slid under our feet, and more than once I nearly fell. But the worst part was realizing how perfect this spot was for murder. A single misstep, and you'd plunge to your death, and no one would ever know the truth. "Almost there," Melissa called from above. She'd already reached the top, moving with the ease of someone who had scouted the route before. Damien followed, then helped Henry and me up the last few feet. His hands on my arms felt like claws. The view was indeed stunning. From up there, you could see the whole valley, the winding river and mountains stretching into the horizon. In another life, it might have been beautiful, but now it felt like a nightmare. "Come over here for the photos," Melissa called, positioning herself near the edge. "I want the valley in the background." We stepped closer, every move bringing us nearer to the edge. Damien stood just behind us, quietly calculating. "Perfect," Melissa said, lifting her camera. "Now hug each other and smile." Henry and I held each other, probably for the last time, as she snapped photo after photo. Each flash felt like lightning, announcing the storm to come. "Take one more," Damien said, stepping closer, "but move back a bit so the view looks better." One step back would put us right on the edge. Henry and I exchanged a final look. The moment had come. We obeyed. Behind us, only air and death. Melissa's eyes had changed. There was no warmth now, no pretense. "Smile," she said, her voice ice cold. "This is going to be your last photo." Then Damien lunged. The plan was simple. Push us backward, take a few photos of the accident, and then climb down later to find our bodies. But Henry was ready. At the last second, he grabbed Damien's wrist and pulled him forward. "If we're going to die," he shouted, "you're coming with us." For a heartbeat, all four of us teetered on the edge, locked together in a horrible, deadly struggle. Melissa screamed and tried to help Damien, but the weight was too much. The ground gave way beneath us. We fell, the world spun, the wind roared in my ears, and the ground rushed up at impossible speed. I thought of Richard, of how he must have felt that night falling just like this. The impact was horrific. Bones snapped, pain exploded everywhere. I could taste blood. But then, through the haze, I heard Henry's voice, weak but alive. "Hilda," he whispered, "don't move. Pretend we're dead." And that's when I realized I was still alive. Every inch of me screamed in agony. Blood covered my face. Something in my arm was broken, my shoulder dislocated, but I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just lay there, listening. A few feet away, I heard Damien and Melissa groaning. They'd survived too, but they sounded worse off than us. "Melissa," Damien groaned, "are you okay?" "I think my leg's broken," she whimpered. "It hurts so much, Damien. What about the old people?" The old people. That's all we were to her, just obstacles in her way. "They're dead," Damien said after a moment. "Both of them, eyes open, not breathing." His lie filled me with hope. "Perfect," Melissa whispered. "It worked exactly as planned. Well, except for the part where we fell, too." She gave a bitter laugh. "At least we don't have to pretend to love them anymore." I lay there, frozen, as they talked. They planned what to say once they found help, how they'd tell everyone it had been an accident, how heroic they'd been trying to save us. Their voices faded as they crawled away, leaving us in the silence of the gorge. When they were finally gone, Henry's whisper reached me. "Hilda, are you okay?" "Alive," I whispered back. "Barely." "My leg's broken," he said, voice shaking, "and I think a few ribs too." I took stock of my own body. My arm throbbed with searing pain, my head was pounding, and my shoulder felt wrong, but I was breathing. "We're bad off," I whispered, "but we're alive." Henry tried his phone. It worked, but there was no signal. That was the worst part. We were alive, but trapped, broken, and utterly alone at the bottom of a gorge. "Before it's too late," I said quietly, "you need to tell me everything that really happened the night Richard died." Henry sighed, his voice trembling. "That night," he began, "Richard came to find me in the workshop. He was furious. He had papers in his hands, bank statements. He showed me proof that Damien had been stealing money from our accounts for months, small amounts at first, then larger ones. The physical pain mixed with emotional agony as I listened to the truth that had been buried for decades. Richard found the discrepancies, Henry continued weakly. He wanted to confront Damien that same night. I tried to calm him down, told him to wait until morning, but he wouldn't listen. He said he couldn't sleep knowing his own brother was stealing from us. You followed him? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I did, Henry said. I was afraid of what might happen. Richard had a temper, and Damien, there was something different about him lately, a coldness that scared me. Henry took a shaky breath. When I reached the gorge, they were shouting at each other. Richard was waving the papers in Damien's face, yelling, "You're a thief! You're stealing from our parents!" Damien denied everything, said Richard was crazy, making it all up. My heart pounded as I pictured it. My two sons facing off in the dark, one accusing the other of betrayal. What happened next? I asked. Henry fell silent for a long moment before continuing. Richard said that if Damien didn't return the money and confess, he would tell us himself. That's when Damien snapped. He screamed that Richard had always been the favorite, that he'd had everything handed to him. Then, Henry's voice broke. Then Damien shoved him. It wasn't an accident. He pushed him as hard as he could. I saw Richard trying to keep his balance, waving his arms, trying to grab something, but it was too late. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the blood on my cheeks. Why didn't you ever tell me? Henry sighed. When I got to Damien, he was crying, shaking, saying over and over that it was an accident, that he hadn't meant to do it. He begged me not to tell you, said he couldn't lose you, too. But you knew he was lying, I whispered. Yes, Henry said softly, but he was my son. My only surviving son. How could I hand him over to the police? How could I destroy what little family we had left? His reasoning cut through me deeper than any wound. And the stolen money? I asked. Damien promised he'd pay it back little by little, Henry said bitterly. Said it was a mistake, that he'd been desperate, that it would never happen again. But he never returned a single penny. He kept stealing. And I kept quiet, every day making myself more of an accomplice. Just then, we heard voices in the distance. Damien and Melissa had found help. Soon the rescue team would be there, and our murderous children would play the part of grieving survivors. The voices grew louder, and the thump of helicopter blades echoed above us. The moment of truth had arrived. Henry and I had to decide, should we keep pretending to be dead until the perfect moment came, or risk being rescued alongside our killers? Hilda, Henry whispered urgently. My phone recorded everything. Melissa's confession, Damien calling us obstacles. It's all there. But if they find us alive now, they'll destroy the evidence before we can hand it over. He was right. If they realized we'd survived, they'd make sure we didn't again. They're down here, Damien's voice shouted. Please hurry, my parents. His tone was flawless, grief-stricken, trembling. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have believed it. Sir, stay calm, a rescuer's voice replied. We're coming down. Ropes clinked, boots scraped rock, and soon I heard Melissa sobbing hysterically. I can't believe this happened, she cried. We were so happy. A rock came loose and they fell. Each word was a dagger. I knew she'd repeat that same story to the police, to reporters, to anyone who'd listen. The rescuers finally reached us. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. One of them checked Henry's pulse. This one's faint but steady, he said. The woman, I'm not sure. Get the medical team down here now. Perfect. They'd think Henry was barely alive and me almost gone. Minutes crawled by as paramedics worked. I felt an oxygen mask slide over my face, straps tightening on the stretcher. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to beg for help, but I didn't. The man's stable but critical, one paramedic said. The woman's in very serious condition, pulse almost imperceptible. We need to evacuate now. Good. They'd take us to the hospital, away from Damien and Melissa, where we could finally speak safely. As we were lifted out, I heard the rescuers comforting my son and daughter-in-law. "You're so brave to survive this," someone told Melissa. "If only they knew the truth, that the real miracle was that Henry and I were alive." In the helicopter, I could hear Henry beside me, fading in and out. His injuries were worse than mine. For a terrible moment, I feared he might die before we could expose them. "Ma'am," one paramedic said gently, "if you can hear me, hold on. We'll be at the hospital soon." His voice was full of real compassion, the first true kindness I'd felt in days. When we landed, chaos erupted, doctors shouting orders, nurses rushing around. I was taken straight into an emergency room. I had to keep pretending to be unconscious, but I needed to find a way to tell someone the truth. "Doctor," a nurse said, "her vitals are strange. Her pulse is stronger than expected." My heart skipped. Had they caught on? "It happens sometimes," the doctor murmured. "The body has strange ways of holding on. Let's keep watch. She's still in critical condition." Then I heard Damien's voice outside. "Can we see them? Just for a minute. We need to say goodbye, just in case." The doctor agreed. Their footsteps drew near. It was the most dangerous moment yet. Damien took my hand. "Mom," he whispered, "if you can hear me, I love you. I'm so sorry this happened." His words were like honey laced with poison, sweet but deadly. Melissa leaned closer. "Hilda, dear," she murmured, "you've been like a mother to me. We'll never forget you." Liar. Then Damien bent to my ear and whispered something that froze my blood. "I hope you've learned your lesson, Mom. You should never have asked so many questions about our finances. Some truths are better left buried, just like Richard." My pulse raced. He'd just confessed. And though I couldn't record it, a nurse was standing nearby. She'd heard everything. I saw her, young, with a name badge that read INS, frozen, eyes wide in horror. She understood exactly what Damien had just said. "What did you mean about Richard?" Melissa whispered sharply, startled. Damien tensed. "Nothing," he muttered. "Just that Mom always wondered what really happened that night. It doesn't matter now." But it did matter, and Melissa knew it. "Let's go," she said quickly. "The doctors need space." After they left, Inns came to my bedside. "Ma'am," she whispered so softly I barely heard her. "If you can hear me, I know something isn't right. Move your finger if you're in danger." I moved it once, then twice. She leaned in. "If those people hurt you, move your finger 3 times. I moved it 3 times. Her breath caught. "Oh my God, they did this!" She straightened up, pretending to check my IV. I saw her struggling, deciding what to do. Then she leaned close again. "I'm going to talk to the doctor. Keep pretending until we can protect you. Do you understand?" I moved my finger once. Minutes later, she returned with the head doctor and 2 police officers. "Ma'am," the doctor said softly, "Nurse Inns told us everything. You're safe now. The officers are here to protect you." Relief almost made me break character. "Can you open your eyes?" one officer asked. Slowly, I did. The bright hospital light burned, but I could finally see their faces, concerned, kind, real. "Thank God," Inns whispered. "I thought I was losing my mind." The detective stepped closer. "I'm Detective Johnson," he said gently. "We understand you may be in danger. Can you tell us what really happened on that mountain?" My voice came out rough and weak, but clear enough to end the nightmare. "My son," I said. "My son and his wife pushed us." The next few hours were a blur of statements, recordings, and shocking revelations. I told Detective Johnson everything: Richard's death, Damien's thefts, the pressure to change our will, and finally, the plan to kill us on that mountain. But the most important thing was the recording on Henry's phone. "Your husband recorded evidence?" the detective asked, his eyes suddenly sharp. Yes, I said. Everything's on his phone. The confessions, the plans, all of it. He went straight to Henry's room. Henry had regained consciousness about an hour before, and when the detective explained the situation, he handed over his phone without hesitation. Here's everything, Henry said, his voice weak but steady. 2 years of lies, and the truth about what happened today. While the technicians analyzed the recording, Damien and Melissa sat in the waiting room downstairs, still pretending to be grieving relatives. They had no idea that their act was about to end for good. The recording is clear, Detective Johnson announced after an hour. We have explicit confessions about Richard's murder, admissions about the stolen money, and direct evidence of premeditated attempted murder against both of you. It's more than enough to arrest them. But are you going to arrest them here? I asked, fear tightening my chest. If they realize we're alive and talking... The detective nodded. Don't worry. We already have officers in position. As soon as the arrest warrant is signed, we'll move in. Until then, you're both under police protection. The irony wasn't lost on me. Damien and Melissa were probably downstairs chatting with other families, accepting condolences for our supposed deaths, and planning how to handle our funeral and inheritance. They didn't realize that upstairs, their perfect lie was falling apart. Is there anything else? Detective Johnson asked, pulling out a folder. After hearing your story, we investigated your son's finances. You were right. He's bankrupt, and he owes money to some very dangerous people, the kind who don't take excuses. My blood ran cold. You mean, we weren't just inconvenient to him? He nodded grimly. You were his only salvation. With your inheritance, he could pay off his debts and start over. Without you, he probably wouldn't have survived a few more weeks. The realization hit me like a second fall off that cliff. We weren't just obstacles. We were his lifeline. Killing us wasn't just convenient, it was necessary for his survival. And what will happen to our grandchildren? I asked quietly, feeling a fresh wave of pain. Social services will take temporary custody, he said gently. But once you've recovered, you can apply for guardianship. The thought of raising the children of our own attempted murderers was overwhelming. But it was also the only way to ensure something good could come from this nightmare. Those children were innocent. They deserved a home filled with real love, not the twisted version they'd grown up with. It's time, the detective said when an officer entered with papers in hand. The warrants are signed. We're arresting them now. From my hospital window overlooking the parking lot, I saw police officers discreetly taking positions. My heart pounded. After 25 years, the truth was finally about to surface. Damien Black and Melissa Black, I heard the commanding officer's voice echo through the hallway. You are under arrest for the murder of Richard Black and the attempted murder of Hilda and Henry Black. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then came Melissa's hysterical voice. What are you talking about? We're the victims. It was an accident. Ma'am, the officer replied calmly, your in-laws are alive, and they've provided full evidence of your crimes. Another pause, and then a scream of pure disbelief. That's impossible, Damien shouted. We saw them die. They were dead. His words were caught on police recorders. Another confession added to the growing list. Over the radio, I heard Melissa's voice break. It was all his idea. I didn't want to do any of this. He forced me. And Damien, desperate, shouted back, You were the one who suggested the cliff. You planned it all. In minutes, the alliance that had held for years collapsed as they each tried to save themselves. An hour later, Detective Johnson returned, looking both satisfied and somber. They're under arrest and on their way to the station, he said. They're blaming each other, which only makes our case stronger. But there's something else you need to know. My stomach clenched. What now? He held up a small digital recorder. We found this in your son's backpack. He'd been recording his conversations with you and your husband for weeks, probably to see if you suspected anything. A chill ran down my spine. What does that mean? It means, the detective said, sighing, he knew you were close to discovering the truth. The trip to the mountain wasn't spontaneous. It was their reaction to your suspicions. In one of the recordings, Melissa says, "We have to act fast before they go to the police." The cold precision of their planning took my breath away. They hadn't just plotted our deaths. They'd been watching us, tracking every word, every movement like predators, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "There's more," the detective added. "In the financial investigation, we discovered your son forged your signature on several documents to access your accounts. If you died that day, he would have gained immediate control of everything." Each word was another stab. My own son, stealing from me, forging my name, and plotting my death. "How much?" I asked, barely able to speak. "About $50,000 over the past 5 years, he said. "Small amounts, but they added up. It funded his lifestyle, while you and Henry worked hard to save it." The days that followed were a blur of interviews, lawyers, and reporters. The media called it the most shocking family betrayal of the decade. Cameras camped outside the hospital, desperate for details. My sister Harriet arrived in tears, hugging me as if I'd come back from the grave. "Oh, Hilda," she sobbed. "I always knew something was off with Damien after Richard's death, but I never imagined this." Her words comforted me, proof that I hadn't been blind all those years. "And the children?" I asked. "I saw them yesterday," Harriet said sadly. "They're confused, asking why their parents can't come home. They're too young to understand." Albert, the lawyer who'd once handled our will, came to update us on the case. "It's solid," he said. "With the recordings, the confessions, and all the financial evidence, there's no way they'll escape conviction." But then his tone changed. "However, their lawyers are trying to negotiate a plea, claiming it was a crime of passion, not premeditated." "A crime of passion?" I cried, furious. "They planned this for weeks, bought special gear, chose the perfect place." Albert nodded gravely. "I know. We have proof of premeditation, but their attorneys will argue financial desperation drove them to it. The idea that they could get lighter sentences for what they did filled me with rage. They'd murdered Richard, they'd tried to murder us, and now they wanted sympathy." "What can we do?" I asked. "Testify," Albert said simply. "Your words will show the jury who they really are, but be prepared. Facing your son in court won't be easy." He was right. The thought of seeing Damien again, of hearing his lies, terrified me. But I had to do it. For Richard, for Henry, for our grandchildren. 3 weeks later, Henry and I finally went home. Our bodies had mostly healed, though he still used crutches and I wore my arm in a sling. The house felt strange, like the set of a play after the curtain had fallen. Everything was just as we'd left it. The breakfast dishes in the sink, the bed unmade, the flowers Damien had brought me wilted and brown. Time had stopped the day our world ended. "Do you think we'll ever be happy again?" I asked that first night, lying beside Henry. He held me close and sighed. "I don't know, Hilda, but we're alive. We have the truth. And for the first time in 25 years, no more secrets." The trial began 6 months later. When I took the stand, I looked Damien in the eye for the first time since the arrest and saw no remorse, no sorrow, just a cold stranger wearing my son's face. When my testimony ended, I spoke directly to him. "Damien, I don't know who you are anymore. My son died the night you killed Richard. What's left of you is a monster I helped raise without realizing it." The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning their verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder for Richard's death, and first-degree attempted murder for what he'd done to us. Melissa received the same sentence as his accomplice, life in prison without parole. A year later, Henry and I began the process of adopting our grandchildren. They are beautiful, kind, and innocent, deserving of a life filled with love. not fear. Every night when I tuck them in, I tell them stories about their Uncle Richard, the brother they never knew, about his kindness, his honesty, and his dream of a family built on truth.